Lesson 16, in Lesson 16, we are going to apply those properties again, but we're multiplying and dividing rational numbers. And by applying those properties again, remember they're ones like the commutative property, or the associative property, or the distributive property. I know, sorry guys, it's a little sloppy, writing fast. But those are some of the properties we're going to be talking with and dealing with, okay? And so let's get in to this first problem here, okay? Using the commutative and associative properties to efficiently multiply rational numbers. Guys, again, the reason we use these properties is actually to make mental math easier. So we're going to do this two times. I'm going to kind of break it in half here. And first one, we're going to use just the order of operations, okay? So order of operations, sorry about that. Order of operations, we basically, parentheses, well, all our parentheses here are just holding that negative sign in, so nothing with that. Exponents, no exponents, multiplication, division. So we're going to multiply and divide from left to right. And this is all multiplication, which is good because you can use our commutative and associative properties with that. Okay, so since this is all multiplication, let's just multiply. Or try to multiply. Okay, so order of operations, again, we have seen that this is all just multiplication, so I am just going to multiply from left to right. I'm going to start by going -6 times 2. A negative times a positive is going to be a negative. 6 times 2 is 12. Times my -2, times my -5, times my -3. Okay? Oh, that's a 3. Okay. Now I'm going to go -12 times -2. Negative, negative, same sign. Same sign means it's positive. 12 times 2 is 24. Times my -5 times my -3. Okay, so now 24 times a -5. Well, positive times a negative is going to be negative. I don't know 24 times 5 off the top of my head, so I'll just do the multiplication here off to the side. 10, 11, 12, so it's 120. So a -120 times a -3. 120, oh, negative times a negative is positive, I know that. 120 times 3 is 360. Okay, positive 360. Great. Okay, nothing too overly hard there, but remember, we're not going to start out with the hard problems, okay? We're going to start out with the easier problems. So let's do the same thing over here, but let's apply some of these properties, specifically the commutative and associative property. When we use these properties, I want you to think in terms of multiples of 10, because multiplying by 10 is really easy, okay? When you multiply by 10, you basically just add 1 0 on to whatever it is. Multiply by 100, you add 2 zeros on. So when I'm looking at these numbers here, what numbers can I multiply together to give me 10? Right here, right? I can go -2 times a -5. Negative times a negative is a positive. 2 times 5 is 10. So I can rewrite this as -6 times 2 times 10 times a -3. Now, doing that, and it's not necessarily you have to write this down, but I want you to realize that when we put grouping symbols in this case brackets, because there was parentheses there, that's our associative property. Okay, so that's our associative property that says we can do that all multiplication, we can put grouping symbols in. Now, remember what I said, when we multiply by 10, we're just adding a 0 on, okay? So I'm just going to kind of change some order around here. I'm going to maybe go -6 times 2. Negative times a positive is a negative. 6 times 2 is 12, okay? And I'm going to change the order right here. And I'm going to go times negative 3 times 10. And remember, when we change the order, that's the commutative property. Oh, I don't think it got much better, but I tried. Okay, so now I can go negative 12 times negative 3. Negative times a negative is positive. 12 times 3 is 36. And I love with 36 times 10. This is why multiplying by 10 is easy. I'm going to take my 36 here, and I'm just going to add a 0 on. And get 360. I get the same answer either way. Okay, but I wrote down all the steps on this one, but there are a lot more of what we could do in our head. And that's really what these properties help us do. Take numbers, take big problems, and hopefully make them a little bit easier to understand. So if we answer these questions real quick, it says, what types of strategies were used to evaluate the expressions? Well, let's see if I can get a text box to work right here. We use order of operations. We also used the associative and commutative properties. Okay, so those helped us. Like order of operations is over here, and there's nothing wrong with that. We could do it. But over here, what I want us in the lesson to start doing is looking for numbers that kind of fit together nice to give us numbers like 10, or I don't know, I'm going to do fractions times something that gives us a nice round whole number. It says, can you identify the benefits of choosing one strategy over another? Well, we get the same answer either way, right? So that doesn't really matter. But one of them is going to be better with mental math. Okay, right here, you know, I'm not writing anything off to the side. These are all numbers I can do in my head. And it's also giving us easier numbers to deal with, okay? And that's helping us do mental math. Because, you know, instead of doing 24 times 5, I did 12 times 3. I know what 12 times 3 is better than I know what 24 times 5 is. Here's a big one, okay? The next one says, what is the sign of the product? Okay, so when we say sign of the product is a solution of a multiplication problem. These are multiplication problems. So what sign did they have? Well, they're positive. 360 is positive. Okay. Positive. So here's a very, very important hint, okay? If you have an even number of negatives, if you have an even number of negatives, you have a positive solution. If you have an odd number of negatives, you have a negative solution. Okay, so even odd. If you were to go negative 2 times negative 2, negative times a negative is a positive, positive 4. But if you go negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2, well, a negative 2 times a negative 2 is a positive 4 times a negative 2, well, that's going to be a negative 8. Notice we have a negative here, and here we have a positive. 2 negatives, 3 negatives. So when you look up here, how many negatives do we have? Now we have some negatives and we have some positives, but I have 1, 2, 3, 4 negatives. 4 negatives. 4 is even. We should have a positive solution. okay? Which we do in this case. And that's really just a really good hint, because sometimes it can get confusing with all those negatives in there. So if I'm like, well, if I have 4, I know my answer has to be positive. So even if I messed up somewhere, I should be able to realize that should be positive. Okay, so this right here, not that. This is kind of an important idea. And you might run into some questions like that sometime. Oh, this problem has, 7 negatives. Will my solution be positive or negative? 7's odd, it'll be negative. All right, let's try one more example. Find an efficient strategy to evaluate the expression and complete the necessary work. Okay, so now we have some fractions going on here. We don't like dealing with fractions, so let's find an easier way to deal with them. If I look right here, okay, I can see that this 1/2 times this 8 or times this 4 would be really nice to do, right? Because I know, even if I go negative times negative, that gives me a positive. Awesome. So I really want to do -8 times a -1/2. Okay, I want to do that first. And then if I look here, this 1/3 and 9, 3 is a factor of 9. So I think it'd be great if I would take 1/3 and I'd multiply it by 9. And then I'm just going to leave this 4 here. So I took there 1/3 and the 9, so I got to leave 4. Okay, so I've got all the terms taken care of, and I use my commutative property to change the order. So now when I do this, I can go negative times a negative is a positive. What's 1/2 of 8? 4. I can throw in some parentheses here. What's 1/3 of 9? Or if you need to put a 1 underneath, and you end up with 1 times 9 and 3 times 1. 9 divided by 3 is 3. And then times 4. And well, I'll show you that in a second. Okay? And so then we can just follow order of operations, right? What's 4 times 3? 12. And what's 12 times 4? 48. Okay, so again, this case we didn't really look for tens, but I looked at numbers matched up with each other. I can tell you what 1/2 of 8 is. I can tell you what 1/3 of 9 is. If we want to do this a different way, and I'm not going to do it all this way out because it doesn't make sense to, we know we'll get the same answer. I'd have to go 4 times 1/3, which is 4 over 3, times a -8, and I have to write that over 1, times a 9, write it over 1, times a -1/2, and then I'd say, okay, well, 4 times a -8 is a -32 over 3. Look at, like, none of us want to do this. This seems way easier. All right, so again, changing the order, putting grouping symbols in, that's making problems easier. So use those tools we have to make the problems easier to solve.